Annabelle, sweetie, this table is for family. Why don't you find yourself a spot at the bar? My mom said it with a smile, in front of 30 guests, at my grandmother's 80th birthday dinner. Everyone laughed. A few nodded along like it was perfectly reasonable. Then the waiter placed a $3,270 bill in front of me. Just me. For all 30 of them. I took a sip of water, smiled, and paid every cent. But before I could stand, a voice from the head of the table cut through the room. Just a moment, please. What happened next cost my mother everything she'd spent 24 years stealing. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop your location and your local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're watching from. My name is Annabelle. I'm 29 years old. And this is how I stopped letting my family treat me like a guest in my own life. Now let me take you back to Crestwood, Georgia, to the night everything changed. I was 5 when I moved into the Everett house. My parents, my real parents, James and Lucy, died on a Tuesday. A pickup truck ran a red light on Route 9 and hit them head on. I was at daycare, finger painting a lopsided sunflower. By the time they found me, I was an orphan. Richard Everett was my father's older brother. He insisted on taking me in. His wife, Diane, did not insist. I learned that early. Kyle and Madison, their biological kids, had bedrooms upstairs, matching bedspreads, glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceilings, nightlights shaped like animals. My room was in the basement, next to the washing machine. It had a window the size of a shoebox, and some nights the dryer would kick on at 2 in the morning, and I'd lie there listening to it thump like a second heartbeat. Diane never hit me. She was smarter than that. Her cruelty lived in small omissions, the kind no one sees unless they're the one being omitted. 3 plates on the table instead of 4. Oh, Annabelle, I keep forgetting. Grab one yourself. Family photos on the mantel, on the stairwell, on the Christmas card. Kyle grinning, Madison in pigtails, Richard with his arm around Diane. I'm in none of them. When I was 8, I asked why. Diane looked at me like I'd asked why the sky was blue. Those are family portraits, Annabelle. She said it gently. That was the worst part. The neighbors thought she was a saint. That woman took in her husband's niece, gave up everything. I heard it at church, at the grocery store, at school pickup. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't know for 24 more years, was that my parents hadn't left me with nothing. They'd left me $600,000, and Diane had spent every cent. By 16, I understood the rules. Kyle got a car for his birthday, a used Camaro, but still. Madison got braces, a violin, summer camp in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I got the employee discount at Hank's Grocery on Route 12, where I stocked shelves 3 nights a week to pay for my own school supplies. The year Kyle left for college, I asked Richard if there was money set aside for me too. We were in the garage. He was sorting wrenches, not looking at me. I'll talk to Diane, he said. Diane's answer came at dinner. College isn't for everyone, Annabelle. You're good with your hands. Kyle's tuition was $80,000. I know because I saw the check on the kitchen counter, written out in Diane's handwriting, and I remember thinking that was more money than I could imagine. I didn't argue. I applied to the community college nursing program on my own, took out federal loans, and worked double shifts at Hank's every summer. The thing about holidays was the photos. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, Diane staged her perfect family portrait in front of the fireplace. She'd hand me the camera. You're the best photographer in the house, Annabelle. So I'd frame them. Kyle in his college hoodie, Madison with her new earrings, Richard stiff in his flannel, Diane beaming in the center. And I'd press the shutter button and the flash would go off, and the image would freeze them exactly the way Diane wanted the world to see them. A complete family. I wasn't in a single one. But there was one person in that family who never forgot me. One person who set a place for me every single time, without being asked. Eleanor Everett was 80 years old, 5'2", and the only person in that family who made me feel like I had a right to breathe. She was Richard's mother, a retired school teacher with a kitchen that always smelled like cinnamon, and a voice that could silence a room without rising above a whisper. Every Sunday, Eleanor picked me up at 9 sharp. We'd drive to her cottage on Maple Hill, and she'd teach me how to bake, apple crumble, buttermilk biscuits, peach cobbler from scratch. While the oven hummed, she'd tell me stories about my father. James had your eyes, she'd say, rolling dough with flour-dusted hands. And your mother, Lucy smiled like sunshine after rain. You have that same smile, Annabelle. I'd hold those words like coins in my pocket, turning them over during the long nights in the basement room. Diane hated my Sundays with Eleanor. She's 80 years old, Annabelle. You're wearing her out. She's fragile. Don't bother her with your problems. Maybe skip this week. She needs rest. I always went anyway, until the year Diane told me if I kept making trouble, she'd tell Eleanor I didn't want to come anymore. I was 14. I believed her. So I started asking permission first, and permission was not always granted. One Sunday, just before I turned 17, Eleanor said something I didn't understand. She put down her rolling pin, looked at me with eyes that were sharp and sad at the same time. Your parents loved you enough to plan ahead, Annabelle. Don't ever forget that. I nodded like I knew what she meant. I didn't. Not for another 12 years. But Eleanor knew exactly what she was telling me, and she was already making plans of her own. Fast forward to now. I'm 29, a registered nurse at Crestwood Community Hospital, living alone in a one-bedroom apartment above the laundromat on Cherry Street. It's small, it's loud on wash days, and it's mine. Eleanor's health has slowed in the past year. Her knees ache, she gets winded on stairs, but her mind is a steel trap, and every Sunday I still drive to Maple Hill. The rest of the family knows what Eleanor has. The cottage, her late husband's pension, savings accounts built over 50 years. Somewhere north of $1 million. In a town like Crestwood, that's a fortune. Diane started her campaign around January. Subtle at first. She'd visit Eleanor with flowers from the shop and happen to mention how difficult I'd been lately. How I'd been distant. How I probably only visited for the inheritance. Kyle backed her up at Easter brunch. Grandma, you know Annabelle's not technically family. Legally, I mean. Madison posted Instagram stories. Selfies with Eleanor, captions reading, "Blood is thicker than water," with a heart emoji. She tagged everyone except me. Then came the phone call. A Thursday evening, late March. Richard's name on my screen. He hadn't called me in 4 months. Annabelle. His voice sounded rehearsed, tired. About Mom's birthday dinner this Saturday. Maybe it's better if you don't come, for everyone's sake. I held the phone away from my ear, stared at the ceiling. Whose sake, Richard? He paused. It'll just cause tension. You know how Diane gets. I did know. That was the problem. I told him I'd think about it. Hung up. I didn't know then that the phone call was part of something much bigger. A plan already weeks in motion. I called Eleanor the next morning. She picked up on the first ring, like she'd been waiting. Grandma, Richard said maybe I shouldn't come Saturday. Silence. Then. Did he say why? He said it would cause tension. Eleanor's breathing was steady, measured. When she spoke, her voice was different, urgent in a way I'd never heard. You have to come, Annabelle, no matter what. Promise me. I promise. And wear something nice, something that makes you feel strong. I almost laughed. Grandma, it's dinner. Promise me. I promise. She paused, and I heard the creak of her rocking chair. I love you, sweetheart. More than you know. She hung up before I could ask why her voice was shaking. That Saturday, I stood in front of my closet for 30 minutes. I didn't own much. Nurses don't need a lot of formal wear. But tucked in the back was a navy dress I'd bought for a friend's wedding 2 years ago. Simple. Fitted. The kind of dress that says I belong here without saying anything at all. I put on my mother's pearl earrings. The only thing of hers I had. Eleanor gave them to me on my 18th birthday. Lucy wore these the night she met your father, she told me. I wrapped Eleanor's gift, a hand-bound photo album I'd spent weeks making, filled with pictures of us baking together, printed from my phone. In the car, my hands were steady on the wheel. I knew Diane would try something. She always did at gatherings. A comment here, a seating arrangement there, a reminder of my place. But this was Eleanor's birthday. Maybe her last one. I wasn't going for Diane. I was going for the only person who never made me prove I belonged. The Magnolia Room sits on the corner of Main and Birch. White columns, magnolia trees flanking the entrance, the only restaurant in Crestwood that requires a reservation. For Eleanor's 80th, Diane had booked the entire main dining room. 30 guests, crystal glasses, white linen, a jazz quartet playing low in the corner. I arrived 10 minutes early, placed my gift on the table by the door. Diane saw me walk in. Her eyes tracked me across the room, but she didn't speak, just lifted her wine glass and turned back to a conversation with Uncle Harold. Eleanor sat at the head of the long table. She looked tired, thinner than last Sunday, her cardigan hanging loose on her shoulders. But when she saw me, her face changed. She reached out with both hands. There you are. I leaned down, kissed her cheek, and felt her grip tighten around my fingers, tight enough to hurt. Sit by me, she whispered. I pulled out the chair to her left. Then I noticed the man on her right. Silver hair, gray suit, leather briefcase tucked under his chair. I'd never seen him before. He gave me a polite nod but said nothing. Who's that? I asked Eleanor quietly. A friend, she said. You'll meet him later. Kyle arrived next, laughing too loud about something on his phone. He saw me, stopped mid-laugh. Oh, you actually came. Madison trailed behind, already angling her phone for a selfie with the chandelier. She positioned herself next to Eleanor, framing the shot carefully. I watched her adjust the angle 3 times, each time making sure I wasn't in it. Dinner started. Plates came out. Conversation hummed. Everything felt normal, but in this family, normal was just the overture before the storm. Diane stood up between the appetizer and the main course. She tapped her glass with a butter knife. The jazz quartet stopped. Thank you all for being here tonight, she said, voice honey warm, scanning the room. Family means everything to us Everetts. She lingered on the word family. Her eyes found mine for exactly 1 second. I'd like to introduce everyone at our table. My wonderful son, Kyle. Some of you know he just closed a big deal in Savannah. Kyle raised his glass. My beautiful daughter, Madison. She's been taking such good care of Grandma lately. Madison blew a kiss to Eleanor. And of course, my husband Richard, the backbone of this family. Richard nodded stiffly. That was it. 3 children introduced. The full roster according to Diane. A woman across the table, I didn't recognize her, maybe someone from Richard's work, leaned forward. And who's this lovely young lady beside Eleanor? Diane blinked, then smiled. Oh, that's Annabelle. She grew up around us, like a stray cat fed on the porch. The woman nodded politely. The moment passed. Then Madison reached across me for the bread basket. Her elbow caught my wine glass, red wine, straight down the front of my navy dress. Oops, Madison pressed her napkin to her lips. Sorry, white would have been a safer choice for you. A few people chuckled. Kyle smirked into his water glass. I looked down at the stain spreading across my lap, dark red, blooming like a bruise. I didn't react. I picked up my napkin, dabbed the fabric twice, and set it back on my knee. Eleanor's hand found mine under the table. She squeezed once, I squeezed back. The main course arrived. Filet mignon, roasted asparagus, truffle mashed potatoes. The smell alone was worth more than my weekly grocery budget. That's when Diane made her move. We need to rearrange a bit, she announced. Uncle Harold needs more room for his chair. Annabelle, sweetie, the bar has some lovely seats. You'd be more comfortable there. It wasn't a question. Kyle leaned back. Yeah, it's not like you're giving a toast. A few people at the far end of the table exchanged glances. 1 or 2 laughed. Not cruelly, just the automatic laugh people give when they don't want to make things awkward. No one objected. I looked at Richard. He was staring at his plate like it held the answer to something. His fork hadn't moved. I looked at Eleanor. Her jaw was tight. Her knuckles were white around her napkin. But she met my eyes and gave me the smallest nod. Barely a tilt of her chin. Wait. Not yet. So I stood up, smoothed my wine-stained dress, picked up my water glass. Happy birthday, Grandma, I said. My voice didn't crack. I walked to the bar at the far end of the dining room. 12 steps, I counted, sat on a stool, set my glass down, and kept my back straight. The bartender, a young guy, maybe 22, looked at me with something between confusion and sympathy. You okay? He asked quietly. I'm fine. I wasn't. But I'd had 24 years of practice at being fine. Have you ever sat in a room full of people and felt completely invisible? Like the air you breathe doesn't count because no one's watching you breathe it? If you have, tell me in the comments. I want to know I'm not the only one. From the bar, I had a clear view of the table. Diane was laughing, refilling glasses, touching people's arms. The perfect hostess. Kyle was telling a story that involved hand gestures and a punchline I couldn't hear. Madison kept checking her phone under the table. Eleanor sat at the head, eating nothing, watching everything. The man in the gray suit hadn't moved. His briefcase stayed under his chair. He cut his steak in precise squares and spoke to no one. 20 minutes passed. Then Madison stood, phone in hand, and walked toward the restroom. She passed right by me, didn't even glance in my direction, like the bar stool was empty. She stopped in the hallway, maybe 6 feet from me. She must have assumed I couldn't hear over the jazz quartet. She was wrong. "It's working," Madison said into the phone. Her voice was low, but the hallway carried sound like a tunnel. "She's at the bar. Mom says one more push and she'll leave for good." Pause. She listened. "No, Grandma doesn't suspect anything. Mom's handling it. We just need her out of the picture before Grandma's lawyer does anything." My hand tightened around my glass. Lawyer. Before Grandma's lawyer does anything. Madison laughed at something the other person said, then walked back toward the dining room without looking at me. I sat very still. This wasn't spontaneous cruelty. This wasn't Diane having a bad night or a few too many glasses of wine. This was a plan. Coordinated. Timed. Designed to push me out the door before something happened. Something involving Eleanor and a lawyer. I didn't know what yet, but the man in the gray suit with the briefcase suddenly made a lot more sense. Dessert came, a 3-tier cake with white frosting and 80 candles. Everyone sang. From the bar, I mouthed the words. Eleanor blew out the candles in 2 breaths. The room cheered. Then she leaned toward Richard and said something I couldn't hear. Richard stood, helped her up, and walked her slowly toward the restroom hallway. But Eleanor stopped at the bar. She reached for my hand. Hers was thin, papery. I could feel every bone, but her grip was iron. "Don't leave tonight," she said. Her voice was barely above a breath. "No matter what happens, promise me." "I already promised, Grandma." "I know." She pulled me slightly closer. "Your parents left you more than memories, Annabelle. It's time you knew." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Richard appeared at her elbow. "Mom, the restroom's this way." Eleanor held my eyes for one more second. Then she let go and shuffled off with Richard, her cane tapping the hardwood floor. I turned on my stool. The man in the gray suit was watching me. Not Diane, not Kyle, me. His expression was unreadable, professional, like a doctor before delivering results. His briefcase sat under his chair. The clasp was brass, and the corner of a thick envelope jutted out from the top, manila, unsealed. He caught me looking, gave the faintest nod, then turned back to his coffee. My heart was beating in my throat. "Your parents left you more than memories." My parents died when I was 5. They were 26 and 28. They drove a 10-year-old Honda and rented a 2-bedroom apartment. What could they possibly have left me? Whatever it was, Diane didn't want me to find out. And that told me everything. Eleanor returned to the table. Diane poured her another glass of wine, her 4th by my count. The evening should have wound down. People were checking watches, reaching for coats, but Diane wasn't done. She stood again, glass raised, cheeks flushed. "I just want to say one more thing." She swept her arm across the table. "Being a mother is the hardest job in the world, and sometimes you take on burdens that aren't yours." A few guests murmured in agreement. "When Richard's brother died, we took in his daughter." Diane pressed a hand to her chest. "No one else would. We gave up vacations. We gave up savings. We gave up our space. Our lives, really." A woman near the end of the table spoke up. "That's Annabelle, right? She seems like a sweet girl." Diane tilted her head. The wine made her honest. "Sweet? She's been riding our coattails for 24 years. She laughed, a loose, ugly sound. "Her parents left nothing. Not a dime. We raised her from zero. The room went still. Her parents left nothing. I heard it from 12 steps away, over the jazz, over the clink of glasses, over everything. My mother and father, dead at 26 and 28, buried in Crestwood Cemetery, Plot 14, and Diane was standing in a room full of people telling them my parents left me with nothing. That was a lie. I didn't know how yet, but Eleanor's words were still ringing in my ears. My hand trembled, not from sadness. I'd swallowed every insult for 24 years, every forgotten plate, every missing photo, every she grew up around us. But talking about my dead parents like they were deadbeats who abandoned me, that was the line, and Diane had just crossed it. The waiter appeared at my elbow. "Excuse me, ma'am." He was young, polite, clearly uncomfortable. He set a leather bill folder on the bar in front of me. I opened it. $3,270. 30 guests, filet mignon, bottles of Pinot Noir and imported champagne, 3-tier birthday cake, and every cent of it charged to my name. "Mrs. Everett arranged for the reservation under your name," the waiter said quietly. "She provided your card for the deposit." My card. The supplementary card Diane added me to when I was 17. "For emergencies," she'd said. I'd stopped using it years ago. Forgot it existed. Diane hadn't. I looked up at the main table. Kyle was grinning, watching me over the rim of his glass. Madison had her phone angled toward me, recording. Diane caught my eye and raised her wine glass in a little toast. A salute, a dare. 30 people were watching. I opened my wallet, pulled out my own debit card, my actual card, attached to my actual savings, the money I'd earned stacking shelves and drawing blood and working back-to-back 12-hour shifts. I handed it to the waiter. "Thank you," I said. "You can run this." He hesitated. "Ma'am, are you sure?" "I'm sure." He took the card. I signed the receipt, tipped 20%. From the main table, Diane's voice floated over like smoke. "See? She knows her place." More laughter, quieter this time. A few guests looked away. I capped the pen, set it down, started to stand. And then, from the head of the table, clear as a bell in a silent church, "Just a moment, please," Eleanor's voice. And it stopped the room cold. Every head turned. Eleanor pushed back her chair. The man in the gray suit stood first, offering his arm. She took it, steadied herself, and straightened to her full 5'2". The jazz quartet had stopped between songs. The timing was accidental, or maybe it wasn't. The only sound was the faint clink of someone setting down a fork. Eleanor looked around the room the way she must have looked at a classroom of restless children. Patient, firm, absolute. "Before anyone leaves," she said, "I have something to say. It is my birthday after all." Diane's smile flickered. "Mom, it's been a long night. You should rest." "Sit down, Diane." 3 words. No volume, no anger, just the kind of authority that comes from 80 years of never bluffing. Diane sat. Eleanor turned to me. "Annabelle, come back to the table, sweetheart." I didn't move at first. 24 years of conditioning will do that. Freeze you in place even when someone's reaching out. But Eleanor held her hand toward me, and something in her face said now. I walked back. 12 steps, the same 12 I'd counted on the way out. Kyle shifted in his seat. Madison lowered her phone. Eleanor waited until I was standing beside her. Then she placed her hand on my arm and said, loud enough for every guest in that room, "You belong here more than anyone at this table." The silence that followed was the thickest I've ever felt, like the air itself was holding its breath. Then the man in the gray suit reached under his chair, pulled out his briefcase, set it on the table, unclasped it, and placed a thick manila envelope next to Eleanor's untouched dessert. Nobody was laughing now. Eleanor rested one hand on the envelope, the other gripped her cane. "Diane just told this room that Annabelle's parents left nothing." She paused. Let the sentence sit. "I'd like to correct that." She nodded to the man beside her. "This is Thomas Garrett. He's been my attorney for 12 years. Thomas Garrett stepped forward, adjusted his glasses. His voice was flat, factual, the kind of voice that reads numbers in courtrooms. "James and Lucy Everett established a trust fund for their daughter, Annabelle, in 2001. The principal amount was $600,000. a combination of life insurance payouts and savings. Richard and Diane Everett were named as custodial trustees. The room didn't gasp. This wasn't a movie. But I watched 30 faces rearrange. Confusion first, then math, then slow dawning understanding. $600,000. My parents had left me $600,000. Eleanor's voice cut through again. That money was meant for Annabelle's education, her first home, her future. She looked directly at Diane. Every penny is gone. Diane's face drained of color. Not red anymore. White. The kind of white that comes before a lie or a scream. That's not... She gripped the edge of the table. Mom, this isn't the place for this. Eleanor didn't blink. You chose this place, Diane. You chose to humiliate my granddaughter in this room, in front of these people. So I will set the record straight in this room, in front of these people. Kyle shot to his feet. Grandma, you're confused. You don't know what you're... I have bank records, Kyle. Eleanor's voice was quiet. Final. Sit down. Kyle sat. I couldn't feel my hands. Thomas Garrett opened the envelope and laid a stack of papers on the white linen tablecloth. These are notarized copies of bank statements from the trust account, he said, spanning 18 years. He didn't read every line. He didn't need to. He summarized in the same flat, courtroom voice. $80,000, withdrawn in 2008. Corresponds to tuition payments for Kyle Everett at the University of Georgia. Kyle's jaw locked. He stared at the paper like it might burst into flames. $45,000? 2015. A BMW 3 Series registered to Madison Everett. Madison's phone slipped from her hand. It hit the table with a crack. $120,000 between 2010 and 2018. Home renovations at 14 Birch Lane. The Everett family home, where I slept in the basement. $95,000, various vacation expenses, Myrtle Beach, Disney World, Lake Tahoe. Places I was never invited. The remaining balance, drawn incrementally over 20 years, personal expenditures by Diane M. Everett. 30 people stared at those papers. I watched their expressions shift, from polite dinner party neutral to something harder. A woman near the center of the table put down her napkin and pushed her chair back slightly, as if she needed distance from the table itself. Mrs. Patterson, Diane's closest friend, her church group confidant, looked at Diane with an expression I'd never seen directed at her before. Doubt. Madison's voice broke the silence. That money was for the whole family. It was for Annabelle. Eleanor pointed a thin finger at the stack. Her name, her fund, not yours. Richard hadn't moved. His face was the color of the tablecloth. His hands were flat on the table, palms down, as if bracing for an earthquake. I sat there, tears running down my cheeks. I didn't wipe them. Eleanor let the silence hold for 3 full seconds. Then she spoke again. I've spent 80 years watching who in this family deserves what. I've made my decision. Thomas Garrett straightened his tie. Mrs. Eleanor Everett has formally revised her estate plan. Effective immediately, Annabelle Everett is named as sole beneficiary. The room fractured. Kyle knocked his chair backward, standing up. You can't do this! Madison started crying. Loud, messy sobs, mascara streaking. Diane's voice was a blade. She's not even your real grandchild! Eleanor turned to Diane, slowly, the way you turn to face something you've seen coming for a long time. She is my son James's daughter. She is more Everett than you will ever be, Diane. Kyle jabbed a finger toward me. This is manipulation. She's been working on Grandma for years. Eleanor didn't raise her voice. The only person who manipulated anyone in this family is sitting right there. She pointed her cane at Diane. The tip trembled, but the aim was exact. Richard still hadn't spoken. He sat with his hands flat on the table, staring at the candles, looking like a man watching his house burn from the inside. I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. I didn't ask for any of this, I said. My voice was steady. Barely. I just wanted to have dinner with my grandmother. Eleanor reached into the pocket of her cardigan, pulled out a photograph, creased and soft from years of handling. She held it up. A man, young, dark-haired, grinning, holding a toddler in a yellow dress. Your father asked me to look after you, Eleanor said. I'm keeping my promise. I took the photo. My father's face. My face. Together. But there was still more to come. Diane shoved her chair back. It hit the wall with a crack that made the bartender flinch. This dinner is over. She grabbed her purse, then spun toward Eleanor. You're clearly not in your right mind. We'll have this thrown out by Monday. Thomas Garrett reached into his briefcase and produced a second document. He set it down like a man laying cards on a table. Mrs. Everett was evaluated 4 weeks ago by Dr. Fiona Reed, board-certified geriatric psychiatrist in Atlanta. Full cognitive assessment. He paused. She is of sound mind. The report is notarized and filed. Diane's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nothing came out. She turned on me. Her voice was raw, stripped of honey, stripped of everything except venom. You did this. You poisoned her against her own family. I looked at her from across the table, wine stains still on my dress, eyes still wet, hands still shaking. But my voice came out clean. I've been sitting at the bar for 2 hours, Diane. When exactly did I do that? A sound moved through the room. Not laughter, not a gasp, but something between them. A release. Several guests looked down. One man rubbed the back of his neck. Mrs. Patterson stood up. She walked to Diane, leaned close, and asked in a voice she probably thought was a whisper, but carried across the silence like a gunshot. Diane, is this true? About the trust fund? Diane didn't answer. She grabbed Richard's arm. We're leaving! Now! Richard didn't move. Richard. He looked at her. For the first time all night, something moved behind his eyes. Something that looked like it had been caged for a very long time. No, he said. Not yet. Diane changed tactics the way weather changes in Georgia. Sudden, total, without apology. The venom vanished. Her shoulders dropped. Her chin trembled. Tears pooled in her eyes, and when she spoke, her voice was a quivering thread. I gave up everything for that girl. She pressed a hand to her chest. 24 years. My youth, my energy, my savings. And this? This is how I'm repaid? Kyle wrapped an arm around her. It's okay, Mom. We'll fight this. Diane turned to the remaining guests, eyes glistening. She turned an old woman against her own children. This is elder abuse. You're all witnesses. I watched it happen, the room tilting. A few guests shifted in their seats. An older man at the far end frowned in my direction. Diane's tears were good. They always had been. In Crestwood, she'd perfected the role of the suffering mother, and the audience knew the script. It was working. Then Thomas Garrett laid one more document on the table, a thick stack, bound with a clip. He turned it to face the room. These are notarized bank records, he said, withdrawal after withdrawal from the trust account over 18 years. Each one signed by Diane M. Everett or Richard J. Everett. He fanned the pages slowly. Dates, amounts, signatures, page after page after page. The room turned back. Mrs. Patterson stared at the papers, then at Diane, then back at the papers. Diane saw it happening, the shift, the loss of her audience, and for the first time something cracked in her performance. Not sadness, not anger, fear. She realized Eleanor hadn't acted on impulse. This wasn't a grandmother's emotional outburst. This was months of preparation, legal documents, medical evaluations, notarized evidence. Diane had walked into her own trap. Richard stood up. The movement was so quiet, so unlike the chaos around him, that it took a moment for anyone to notice. He didn't push his chair. He just rose, slow, heavy, like a man standing up in water. Mom. His voice cracked on the single syllable. I'm sorry. I knew. I should have stopped it years ago. Diane whipped toward him. Shut up. Don't say another word, Richard. No, Diane. He turned to face her, and I saw something I'd never seen in 24 years. Richard Everett looking his wife in the eye without flinching. Enough. I've been quiet for 24 years. I'm done. He turned to me. His chin was shaking. His hands hung at his sides like broken tools. Your parents trusted us, Annabelle. They trusted me. He swallowed. I failed them. I failed you. The room was so silent I could hear the ice melting in someone's glass. I looked at this man, The man who drove me to school when Diane wouldn't, who fixed my bicycle chain in the garage without being asked, who never once raised his voice at me, and who also never once raised it for me. I know, Dad, I said. I hadn't called him Dad in years. It wasn't forgiveness. It was just the truth, the complicated, tangled, insufficient truth of what he was. Kyle stared at his father like he was watching a stranger. Madison stopped crying. Then Richard reached into his back pocket, pulled out something small and creased, a handmade birthday card, construction paper, childish handwriting. Annabelle wrote this for you 15 years ago, Mom, he said to Eleanor. Diane threw it away. I kept it. Eleanor took the card with trembling hands, read it, and wept. I stood up. Not fast, not dramatic, just stood, the way you stand when you've made a decision that took 24 years to arrive. The room was watching. 30 faces, some sympathetic, some stunned, some already composing the version they'd tell tomorrow at church or the grocery store. I didn't care about any of those versions. I looked at Diane. I'm not going to yell, I said. I'm not going to call you names, but I'm done being the person you wipe your feet on. I'm done sitting at the bar while you decide who counts as family. Diane's mouth moved, but nothing came out. I turned to Kyle and Madison. I don't hate either of you, but I won't pretend anymore. Madison looked at the floor. Kyle looked at the wall. Neither of them looked at me. I turned to Eleanor, took her hand. Thank you for keeping your promise to my dad. Eleanor squeezed my fingers. Her eyes were still wet, but she was smiling. A thin, fierce, satisfied smile. Then I faced the room one last time. 30 people. Crystal glasses. White tablecloths stained with an evening no one would forget. I paid the bill, I said. That's the last thing I'll ever pay for this family. I helped Eleanor to her feet. Thomas Garrett collected his briefcase, tucked the documents inside, and followed us toward the door. Behind us, Diane's voice clawed after us. You'll hear from our lawyer. Eleanor stopped, turned, looked at Diane over her shoulder with the patience of a woman who had been planning this moment for 2 years. Please do, she said. Thomas is very thorough. We walked out into the March night. The air was cold and sharp and clean. The real fight was just beginning. 2 weeks later, Diane launched her counteroffensive. The Facebook post went up on a Tuesday afternoon. 12 paragraphs of carefully crafted victimhood. She described herself as a loving mother who'd sacrificed everything for an ungrateful adopted child. She wrote about Eleanor's declining mind and my calculated manipulation of a vulnerable elderly woman. She used the phrase elder abuse 3 times. In a town of 9,000 people, that post spread like fire through dry grass. By Wednesday morning, it had 200 shares. People I'd known my whole life started looking at me differently. A nurse at the hospital asked me, voice low in the break room, "Is it true about your grandmother?" A neighbor crossed the street when she saw me coming. Then came the legal assault. Kyle hired a lawyer, Brian Prescott, the most expensive attorney in the county, and filed a petition to challenge Eleanor's will. The grounds: undue influence. The claim was that I had isolated Eleanor from her family and coerced her into changing her estate plan. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. Madison sent me a text at 11 at night. I still have it saved. We'll drag this out until you're broke. You'll wish you'd stayed at the bar. I sat on my apartment floor that night, reading letters and comments and text messages from people who'd never bothered to hear my side. My savings account had $31,000 in it, every penny from 6 years of nursing. That wouldn't last long against Brian Prescott's hourly rate. But Thomas Garrett had already prepared for this. Eleanor had already prepared for this. They'd been ready for Diane's war long before Diane knew she was fighting one. Thomas Garrett called me on a Thursday. "We're filing a counterclaim," he said. No preamble. "Breach of fiduciary duty. Your parents designated Richard and Diane as custodial trustees. That carries a legal obligation. Every dollar in that fund was required to be used solely for your benefit. And they used it for Kyle's tuition, Madison's car, their vacations. For 18 years. I could hear him turning pages. The documentation is thorough: bank records, withdrawal slips, corresponding purchases. Your grandmother spent 6 months compiling this. 6 months. While I was driving her to Sunday brunch and thinking everything was normal, Eleanor had been building a case. Thomas filed the counterclaim in county court. Breach of fiduciary duty, requesting full restitution of the $600,000, plus interest, plus legal fees. In the same filing, he submitted Dr. Fiona Reed's cognitive evaluation. Eleanor had scored in the 97th percentile for her age group. Sound mind didn't begin to cover it. Kyle's lawyer, Brian Prescott, reviewed our filing. I know what happened next because Thomas told me. Prescott called Diane that same evening. Mrs. Everett, I'd strongly advise you to settle. Diane's answer, according to Thomas, was 4 words. I'd rather burn everything. Sometimes I wonder, if I just walked away that night, taken whatever scraps they offered and disappeared, would life have been easier? Simpler? But then I think about my parents. They set up that fund when they were 25 years old. They planned for a future they wouldn't live to see. They did that for me. I couldn't walk away from that. Would you? I'm curious. Would you fight to the end, or cut your losses and move on? Tell me in the comments. I've thought about this 1,000 times. The hearing took place 6 weeks later at the Mercer County Courthouse, a brick building with columns that needed painting, and a flagpole that leaned slightly to the left. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a courtroom with fluorescent lights and a judge named Harriet Dawson who wore reading glasses on a chain. I won't recount every motion and objection. Court isn't like television. It's slow and procedural and smells like old carpet. But here's what mattered. Kyle's petition to challenge Eleanor's will was dismissed. Dr. Reed's evaluation was airtight. Thomas had documented every interaction between Eleanor and me for the past 2 years. Dates, witnesses, context. There was zero evidence of isolation or coercion. The judge said it plainly. The petitioner has presented no credible basis for the claim of undue influence. Then came the counterclaim. Thomas laid out 18 years of withdrawals. Names, dates, amounts, corresponding purchases. Every page notarized, every signature verified. Diane's lawyer tried to argue the money was used for the household, which included me. Thomas produced my tax returns, my student loan statements, my pay stubs from Hank's grocery. The judge did the math herself. The court finds that the defendants systematically misappropriated funds entrusted to them for the benefit of a minor, Judge Dawson said. The court orders full restitution. $600,000, plus interest, plus Thomas's fees. Roughly $720,000 in total. Diane gripped the defense table. Kyle slammed his palm down. Madison cried. Richard sat perfectly still, hands folded, and said nothing throughout the entire proceeding. We walked out into the parking lot, Thomas, Eleanor, and me. The sun was harsh and bright. Then I heard footsteps behind me, Richard jogging to catch up, holding a battered shoebox against his chest. Richard held out the shoebox. His hands were shaking. This is everything I saved, he said. Photos, your mother's journal, your birth certificate. Diane wanted to throw it all away after the funeral. I hid it in the garage behind the paint cans. I took the box. It weighed almost nothing. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Richard said. I just didn't want you to lose them twice. He turned and walked to his truck. Didn't wait for a response. I stood in the parking lot holding a shoebox full of my parents, and I watched him drive away. That was the last time Richard and I spoke face to face. The fallout in Crestwood was swift and merciless. The way small towns handle scandals they can't ignore. Diane's Facebook post, the one with 200 shares, became evidence of a different story. People reread it through new eyes. The comments section turned. Mrs. Patterson, the church group friend who'd asked Diane about the trust fund at the restaurant, called Diane the following Sunday. I think you should find another church group, Diane. The flower shop on Oak Street, Diane's Petals, the one she'd run for 15 years, lost 1/3 of its customers in a month. In a town that runs on reputation, a court ruling is a scarlet letter. Kyle's real estate firm let him go. His boss didn't cite the case directly. He said, if you can't manage your own family's finances, how can clients trust you with theirs? Madison, who'd never held a job longer than 3 months, lost her only income source, Diane's support. She applied at a grocery store on Route 12. The same Route 12 store where I once stacked shelves at 16. Some things come full circle without anyone planning it. Even after the ruling, Diane's version of events still floated around certain corners of Crestwood. Some people believe the first story they hear, no matter what comes after. I was still the gold digger to a handful of neighbors. Still, the adopted girl who manipulated a sick old woman in a few group chats. Then Nora got involved. Nora Beckett, my best friend since 10th grade, now a reporter at the Crestwood Gazette. She didn't write a puff piece. She didn't write a hit job. She wrote a straight, fact-based article. Court records, bank statements, the timeline. No opinion, just truth, laid out chronologically. It ran on the front page of the Wednesday edition. In a town that still reads its local paper, that mattered. The comments section and the letters to the editor that followed told a different story from Diane's Facebook post. This time, people had receipts. What surprised me most wasn't the public support, it was the private kind. Letters started arriving at my apartment, handwritten, some of them, from other adopted kids in the county. Adults now, sharing stories I recognized like reflections in a mirror. The different rules, the missing photos, the gratitude expected for basic shelter. One woman wrote, "I was told my whole life that I was lucky to be taken in. Your story made me realize that lucky was their word, not mine." In the stack of letters was one I didn't expect. From a law office in Atlanta. A man named Gerald Hayward. He'd been my parents' attorney. "I tried to contact you when you turned 18 to inform you about the trust. My letters were returned. I believe they were intercepted. I'm sorry I couldn't reach you sooner." Diane had blocked even that. The Sunday after Nora's article ran, I drove to Maple Hill. Eleanor was on her porch, rocking chair moving in that slow rhythm I'd known since I was 5. 2 cups of tea sat on the side table. She always set out 2 cups before I arrived. Always. I sat down. Didn't speak for a while. The dogwood trees in her yard were blooming, white and pink, fragile-looking but tough enough to survive a Georgia spring. "How long did you know?" I finally asked. Eleanor wrapped both hands around her cup. 2 years. I found a bank statement in Richard's desk. I was looking for a pen. The account had Annabelle Everett Trust printed right across the top. Balance, $43. She took a sip, set the cup down. "I spent 6 months confirming everything, called Gerald Hayward, contacted the bank. Then I found Thomas." She looked at me. "I waited for the right moment. Diane chose the restaurant. I just used her stage." I stared at the dogwoods. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because if I told you too early, Diane would have found a way to explain it. She's good at that. I needed everything documented first. I needed it airtight." She reached under her chair and pulled out a small album, one I'd never seen. Inside, photographs. Eleanor visiting a cemetery, standing before 2 headstones, placing flowers, white roses. The dates on the photos spanned years. "I go every April," she said. "Your father's birthday." I didn't know that. 15 years of visits, white roses, every single year. I cried. Not the tears from the restaurant. Those had been shock and hurt and anger. These were different. These were the tears you cry when someone proves that love doesn't have an expiration date. "Your father would be proud," Eleanor said. "Not because of the money, because you stayed kind." 6 months later, I stood in the Crestwood Public Library, the same library where Eleanor used to take me for story hour when I was 7, and watched her cut a ribbon. The banner behind her read, "The James and Lucy Everett Scholarship Fund." It was a Tuesday morning. 40 people showed up. Teachers, nurses from the hospital, a few families from the county foster system. Thomas Garrett stood in the back, arms crossed, something close to a smile on his face. I'd used the restitution money, the original $600,000, to endow the fund. Thomas helped structure it as a nonprofit. The purpose was simple: educational support for foster children and adopted kids in Mercer County. Tuition, books, housing, whatever they needed to build a life that didn't require anyone else's permission. Eleanor asked me to say a few words. I'm a nurse, not a public speaker, but I tried. "My parents set up a trust fund when they were 25 years old," I said. "They were planning for a daughter they didn't know they wouldn't get to raise. I'm using that money the way I think they would have wanted, to help kids like me." I looked at the small crowd. Some were nodding. A woman in the second row was crying. "Being adopted doesn't make you less than. Being different doesn't make you a burden. And if anyone ever tells you that the only reason you matter is because someone chose to keep you, remember, you mattered before they chose. You mattered the day you were born. Eleanor clapped first, then everyone else. We served cake afterward. Eleanor's recipe, apple crumble, cinnamon so thick you could smell it from the parking lot. It wasn't revenge. Revenge is loud and ugly and leaves you emptier than before. This was legacy. Diane came to find me 3 weeks after the scholarship launch. I was finishing a 12-hour shift at the hospital. Tired, still in scrubs, hair pulled back, no makeup. She was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against a car I didn't recognize. Not the Lexus anymore. Something smaller, older. She looked different. The highlights in her hair were growing out. Her nails were unpolished. The composure she wore like armor for 24 years had cracked, and what was underneath looked exhausted. "Annabelle," I stopped, keys in hand. I know I wasn't perfect. Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. But I raised you. I fed you. I kept a roof over your head. That has to count for something. I took a breath. The parking lot was quiet. Just the two of us and the hum of the highway. "It does count," I said. "And I'm grateful for the roof. I'm grateful for the meals. But gratitude doesn't mean I owe you my inheritance, my dignity, or my silence." Diane's chin trembled. "Can we start over?" I looked at her, really looked, at the woman who forgot my plate at dinner, who introduced me as someone who grew up around us, who lied about my parents in front of 30 people and called it sacrifice. "No," I said, "we can't start over, but I'm not going to take anything from you, and I'm not going to let you take anything from me. Not anymore. That's the boundary." She opened her mouth, closed it, nodded once, small, defeated, and walked back to her car. I watched her pull out of the lot and turn onto Route 12. I didn't call after her. I went inside, clocked in for the night shift, and took care of my patients. Life continues. Diane sold the house on Birch Lane, the one renovated with my trust fund money. After the settlement, legal fees, and back taxes, she cleared just enough to rent a 1-bedroom apartment on the east side of town. The flower shop closed in August. 15 years of Diane's petals, gone. The sign hung in the window for weeks before someone finally took it down. Kyle left Crestwood without saying goodbye. To me or to anyone, as far as I know. Last I heard, he was selling real estate in Tallahassee. He deleted his Facebook, changed his phone number. Madison got a job at the grocery store on Route 12. The irony writes itself, and I won't underline it. She works mornings. I sometimes see her car in the lot when I drive past. We don't wave. We don't pretend. Richard filed for divorce the month after the court ruling. He moved into the Pinecrest Motel off the highway. He sends me a letter every month, handwritten, on yellow legal pad paper. He doesn't ask for forgiveness. He writes about going to therapy, about the things he should have said 20 years ago, about learning to sit with guilt instead of hiding from it. I read every letter. I keep them in a drawer beside my bed. I haven't written back yet. I don't know if I will, but I don't throw them away. That feels like something. Maybe one day it'll feel like enough. Eleanor is still here, still sharp, still making apple crumble every Sunday. The difference now is that I drive to Maple Hill and park in the driveway without checking my phone first to see if Diane has given me permission. I don't need permission anymore. I never did. I'm not telling you this story to gloat. I'm telling you because for 24 years, I believed that belonging was something other people could give me or take away. That if I was just quiet enough, grateful enough, small enough, eventually Diane would look at me and see a daughter instead of a debt. She never did. And that was never my failing. It was hers. If you're in a situation like mine, where someone uses the word family like a leash, where gratitude is just another name for control, I want you to hear this. Setting a boundary is not revenge. It's not cruelty. It's not even anger. It's the moment you stop agreeing that you're worth less than they've decided. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors. You choose who walks through. I still work at Crestwood Community Hospital. I still live above the laundromat on Cherry Street. The dryer downstairs still kicks on at 2 in the morning sometimes, and I lie there listening to it, But now, in my own apartment, it sounds different. It sounds like my life, not someone else's leftovers. On my nightstand, there's a photograph. A young man with dark hair, grinning, holding a toddler in a yellow dress. Behind them, sunlight. Ordinary, beautiful, permanent sunlight. I finally feel like I'm home. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story touched something in you, press that like button so more people get to hear it. And if you've ever been told you should be grateful for less than you deserve, write it down. Put it in the comments. I read every single one, and I promise you, you're not alone. There's another story waiting for you in the description below. I think you'll feel it the same way. I'll see you there. "This is what happens when you disobey me," my father said, standing over a fire he'd built from everything I owned, while holding a garden hose to protect his lawn. My clothes, my sketchbooks, my grandmother's handmade quilt, 3 winters of her stitching, gone in 4 minutes. I was 17. I watched the smoke rise and said nothing. 6 years later, I called him. He picked up on the first ring. I said 2 words. What he found in his mailbox that evening changed everything, but not in the way he expected. Before I go on, please like and subscribe if this story speaks to you. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from. My name is Bethany. I'm 23. Now let me take you back to Dayton, Ohio. The fall I turned 17, the week my father found my college application. The house at 4892 Ridgewood Drive was a 3-bedroom ranch on a 1/4-acre lot in a suburb where every other mailbox had an American flag sticker and every driveway held at least 1 pickup truck. My father, Gerald Thornton, had re-shingled the roof himself, poured the concrete patio himself, and bolted a brass house number plaque beside the front door that he polished every spring like it was a medal he'd earned in combat. To him, that house wasn't shelter. It was proof. Proof he'd made something. Proof he was somebody. Proof he was in charge. And inside it, he was. Dinner was at 6 sharp. I cooked. I washed. My older brother Garrett sat at the table and ate and left his plate for me without a word, because that was simply how things worked in our house. Gerald sat at the head, remote in hand. The television only ever played what he chose, and if the food was late, or the chicken was dry, the silence at that table turned into something with weight, something that pressed down on your shoulders until you couldn't swallow. Gerald kept every important document locked in a steel filing cabinet in the garage: my birth certificate, my social security card, my immunization records. I had never held my own ID. When I once asked for my social security number, I needed it for a part-time job application at the coffee shop on Route 48. He copied 9 digits onto a sticky note, watched me memorize them, and took the note back. In the living room sat his lazy boy recliner, oxblood leather, cracked at the armrests. Nobody sat in it. Nobody touched it. It faced the television like a throne facing a court, and every evening Gerald lowered himself into it with the authority of a man who believed the whole house orbited his comfort. It did. My brother Garrett was 22 when I was 17. Gerald had paid his community college tuition, a 1.5 years of classes Garrett mostly skipped before dropping out, without a single lecture about gratitude. Now Gerald was drawing up plans to set Garrett up with his own auto repair shop. Father and son spent weekends pricing hydraulic lifts and floor jacks the way some families planned vacations. I graduated in the top 10 of my class. My art teacher, Mrs. Rourke, pinned one of my charcoal portraits in the front hallway display case. My math scores were high enough that the guidance counselor printed a list of colleges and slid it across her desk to me with a hopeful look. I brought that list home folded inside my textbook. After dinner, plates cleared, I set it on the table in front of Gerald. He didn't pick it up. "College," he said, not as a question. "For what?" "Business," I said, "or accounting." He leaned back. "A girl goes to college, gets a degree, then gets married, and the degree sits in a drawer. You want to owe $50,000 for a piece of paper in a drawer?" Patricia, my mother, stood at the sink, her hands paused on a dish. She didn't turn around. I could get financial aid, I said. You could get a job and contribute to this household, he said, like you're supposed to. I was already working weekends at the coffee shop on Route 48, $8.75 an hour, every dollar direct deposited into an account Gerald had opened in both our names. I never saw a bank statement. I didn't have an ATM card. My labor went in, and Gerald decided what came out. Garrett's future was an investment. Mine was an expense. But every Tuesday and Thursday after school, I stayed at the library. Gerald thought I was shelving books for volunteer credit. I was not. When I was 14, Gerald slammed his palm on the dinner table so hard the water glasses jumped. I don't remember what I'd done. Probably spoken without being spoken to. Probably breathed too loudly. Probably existed in a way that reminded him he wasn't the only person in the room. He leaned across the table and shouted 3 inches from my face until his spit hit my cheek. The next morning, I told my school counselor. A woman from Child Protective Services knocked on our door 4 days later. She wore a lanyard and a patient smile. She looked around the house. Clean, stocked refrigerator, no bruises, took notes, asked questions. Gerald was calm and polite the entire visit, the way a man is calm and polite when he knows what's at stake. Nothing came of it, but Gerald never forgot. From that day forward, I became the girl who called the cops on her own father. Gerald made sure every aunt, uncle, and cousin knew it. Thanksgiving dinners, Easter brunches, 4th of July cookouts. He'd work it into conversation like a man picking a scab. Beth here once brought CPS to our house. 14 years old, can you imagine? I kept a roof over her head and she thanked me with a caseworker in my living room. Relatives stopped calling me. Invitations thinned. I became the difficult one, the problem, the cautionary tale of what happens when a daughter doesn't know her place. And whenever I pushed back on anything, curfew, chores, the money Gerald took, he had one line that ended every argument. You want to call the cops again? Go ahead. See who believes you this time. One night, just the 2 of us in the kitchen, my mother whispered, Don't provoke him, Beth. Her hands were shaking around a coffee mug. She wasn't defending him. She was surviving him. And somewhere inside her arithmetic of fear, keeping me quiet meant keeping us both intact. On the living room wall hung a framed family portrait. Gerald, Patricia, Garrett, smiling at a JCPenney studio. I wasn't in it. Gerald told relatives I'd been busy that day. The truth was simpler. He never asked me to come. My grandmother, my mother's mother, died the spring I turned 15. Ovarian cancer. Diagnosed late. She spent her last 2 months at home in a recliner that looked nothing like Gerald's, surrounded by baskets of fabric and a sewing machine that hummed late into the night. The quilt she left me was a patchwork of cotton scraps from clothes we'd both worn, a sleeve from my 4th grade field trip shirt, a hem from the dress she wore to my kindergarten graduation, pieces of old flannel nightgowns and hand-me-down blouses layered and stitched into something that held warmth the way only handmade things can. She'd tucked lavender sachets into the seams. 2 years after her death, I could still smell them. Every night I pulled that quilt up to my chin and felt, for 10 seconds, like I belonged to someone who was glad I existed. My grandmother was the only adult who ever said to me, plainly, You're sharp with numbers, Bethany. You have to go to school. Promise me. I promised. And so, on those Tuesday, Thursday afternoons at the school library, I wasn't volunteering. I was sitting at a public computer, pulling up the Sinclair Community College admissions page and filling out an application, one field at a time, saving my progress, clearing the browser history before I logged off. I used the school's address for correspondence. I listed Mrs. Rourke as a reference. I wrote my personal essay about the quilt, about someone building something beautiful out of scraps, about patience as a form of love. I didn't tell a soul. What I didn't know was that Gerald had set up parental notifications on the school's network system, something he'd demanded after the CPS visit, framed as keeping tabs on her internet usage. Every week, the system flagged activity categories and emailed a summary to the parent on file. The week I accessed college application resources 4 times, Gerald got an alert. I came home on a Thursday evening and knew something was wrong before I reached the kitchen. The television was off. Gerald sat in the lazy boy, but he wasn't reclined. He was upright, both feet flat on the carpet, hands resting on the armrests like a man about to deliver a verdict. The house was silent in a way that silence shouldn't be. Loaded, pressurized, the kind of quiet that makes your eardrums hum. "Sit down," he said. I sat on the couch across from him. My backpack was still on. I could feel the zipper pressing into my spine. "I got an email from the school," he said. His voice was low and steady, which was worse than yelling. Yelling meant the storm had already arrived. This voice meant it was still building. "College application resources. 4 visits this week." My mouth went dry. "You want to explain that?" "I was looking into—" "Behind my back." He cut me off without raising his volume. "You sat in that library and applied to college behind my back. After I told you no. After I explained why. I just wanted to see if I could— You snuck around. Just like you did when you were 14. He let the CPS reference land. It always landed. "You call the authorities on your own father. You go behind my back to do the one thing I told you we couldn't afford. Same pattern. Liar. Sneak." Patricia stood at the kitchen sink. I could hear the faucet running, though she'd stopped washing anything. Her hands were motionless in the water. Gerald stood up. The lazy boy rocked once behind him. He walked to the garage. I heard the filing cabinet open, the jingle of keys. When he came back, he was holding a heavy-duty black trash bag and his ring of house keys. He looked at me and said one word. "Outside." He went to my room first. I followed him up the stairs because I didn't know what else to do, because my body hadn't yet caught up with the understanding that what was happening was actually happening. Gerald yanked open my closet and started pulling. Shirts, jeans, the second-hand winter coat I'd bought at Goodwill with my own tips. He stuffed them into the trash bag the way a man bags leaves in autumn. Mechanical, thorough, no hesitation. My sketchbooks went next. 3 years of charcoal portraits, still lifes, the drawing Mrs. Rourke had displayed in the school hallway. He bent them in half to fit. Then the books. Algebra 2. A P. English. A used copy of Pride and Prejudice I'd found at a yard sale for 50 cents. Garrett stood in the hallway, arms crossed, leaning against the doorframe. He watched the way someone watches a car accident. Fascinated, removed. He didn't say a word, didn't reach out a hand, didn't step forward. He simply observed his sister's life being shoved into a garbage bag, and then he looked at his phone. My mother appeared behind Garrett. Her face was white. "Gerald, please." "Shut your mouth," he said without turning around, "or yours is next." Patricia stepped back. She pressed herself against the hallway wall and stayed there, one hand covering her lips. Gerald pulled the quilt off my bed. Something electric shot through my chest. "Not that," I said. My voice cracked for the first and last time. "Please. That's from Grandma." He held the quilt balled up in both hands and looked at me the way a man looks at something he's about to prove a point with. "Your grandmother spoiled you," he said. "Look where that got us." He carried everything downstairs, through the kitchen, out the back door. I followed, and when I saw the burn barrel already standing in the center of the yard, the old steel drum he used for brush in the spring, positioned and waiting, I understood. He'd planned this. The barrel was already there. Gerald upended the trash bag into the barrel. My clothes, my books, my sketchbooks, they tumbled in like they were nothing. He reached for the plastic bottle of lighter fluid on the patio table. He'd set that out too. He doused everything. The chemical smell cut through the October air. Then he pulled a long-reach lighter from his shirt pocket, clicked it once, and held the flame to the edge of a cotton shirt. The fire caught fast. I stood 6 feet away and watched 17 years of belongings curl and blacken inside a steel drum in my father's backyard. Pages of sketches folded into ash. Fabric shrank and split. The lighter fluid made the flames jump high enough that I felt the heat on my forearms. Then he dropped the quilt in. Patchwork cotton, my grandmother's careful squares, the lavender sachets, The soft flannel from nightgowns I'd worn at 7 and 10 and 12, caught at one corner and spread inward. The colors tightened, then disappeared. The whole thing was gone in under 4 minutes. Gerald held the garden hose in his other hand. Not for my things. For his lawn, in case the sparks drifted. Next door, I saw Mrs. Ruth Delano standing on her back porch. She was 70 years old, white-haired, both hands pressed to her mouth. She was watching through the chain-link fence, and she didn't look away. Gerald turned to me. He raised his voice, not for my benefit, but for the neighborhood. "This is what happens when you disobey me." I stared at the smoke. It rose in a thin gray line above the rooftops and vanished into a sky that was too blue to care. I said nothing, not because I had nothing to say, but because I'd already said my last word in that house. He thought he was teaching me a lesson. He was right, just not the one he intended. That night I lay on a bare mattress in a room that smelled like lighter fluid and regret. No quilt, no sketchbooks on the desk, no winter coat in the closet. Gerald had locked the front door at 9 like he always did. The deadbolt he'd installed himself, keyed from both sides, so nobody left without his permission. Around 11, my bedroom door opened. No knock, no light. Patricia slipped in and sat on the edge of the mattress. She didn't speak right away. I could hear her breathing, shallow, careful, the way you breathe when you're trying not to exist too loudly in a house that punishes sound. She pressed a white envelope into my hand. I opened it by the glow of the streetlight through the blinds. Inside, my birth certificate, my social security card, and a thin fold of cash. $340 in 20s and 10s. Money she'd been skimming from grocery budgets over months, maybe years, hiding it in places Gerald would never look, because Gerald never helped with groceries. "Go," she whispered. "Don't come back. I'm sorry, Beth." She squeezed my hand once. Then she stood up and walked out of my room and closed the door without turning around, because if she turned around she would cry. And if she cried, Gerald would hear. And if Gerald heard, the envelope would disappear into the filing cabinet, and this one narrow window would seal shut forever. I waited 15 minutes. Then I pushed open my bedroom window. Ground floor, thank God. Swung my legs over the sill and dropped 3 feet into the side yard. I was wearing jeans, a t-shirt, and sneakers. Nothing else. I walked to Mrs. Delano's house. 3 minutes. The porch light was on. I knocked twice. She opened the door, looked at my face, and pulled me inside without asking a single question. I left 4,892 Ridgewood Drive with $340 and a white envelope. I didn't know that 6 years later I'd stand in front of that same house holding a deed with my name on it. Gerald discovered I was gone by 6:15 the next morning, when nobody was in the kitchen making breakfast. He did not look for me. Instead, he picked up the phone and began calling family. Aunts, uncles, cousins, the entire network of Thornton's and Patricia's side too, and delivered a version of events so polished you'd think he'd rehearsed it. She ran off. Middle of the night. No note, no explanation. After everything I've done, the roof, the food, the clothes, some kids are just born ungrateful. You remember the CPS thing? Same girl, same pattern. The narrative took root immediately because Gerald had spent 3 years fertilizing the soil. The relatives who'd already filed me under difficult now upgraded me to lost cause. Nobody called me. Nobody asked Patricia for my side. Nobody drove around looking for a 17-year-old girl who'd left home in October with no coat. By the afternoon, Gerald had cleared my bedroom. Mrs. Delano, watching from her kitchen window, told me later that she saw him carry out a bookshelf, a small desk, and a floor lamp. Within 48 hours, the room held a weight bench, a standing mirror, and rubber floor mats. Garrett's new home gym. 17 years of my existence, painted over in a weekend. Gerald also called the school, told them I'd transferred to live with relatives. The secretary logged it without follow-up. My guidance counselor, the one who'd printed that college list, never got the chance to ask where I'd gone. Mrs. Delano sat me at her kitchen table that first morning, pushed a plate of scrambled eggs toward me, and said, "Eat first. Then we'll figure out what comes next." She pulled a phone book from a drawer and found the number for the Montgomery County Youth Services Shelter. She drove me there herself in her Buick, and she didn't cry until after she'd pulled away from the curb. That shelter became my address. A bunk bed, fluorescent lights, a 10 o'clock curfew, and 3 other girls who were each carrying their own version of the same story. The shelter smelled like industrial cleaner and microwave popcorn. The mattresses were vinyl. The showers ran lukewarm for exactly 7 minutes before the timer cut them off. I shared a room with 3 other girls, Danielle, who slept in her shoes, Mackenzie, who talked in her sleep about someone named Kyle, and a girl everyone called Birdie, who never told us her real name and left after 2 weeks without saying goodbye. A social worker named Mr. Foss helped me open a bank account in my own name for the first time in my life. I sat across from a teller at a Chase branch and slid my birth certificate and social security card across the counter. The same documents Patricia had pressed into my hand in the dark. And when the teller asked for a deposit, I put in $200 from Gerald's $340 and kept the rest as cash for bus fare and food. Mr. Foss also helped me enroll in GED prep since I'd been pulled from school before finishing my junior year. And he flagged me for Medicaid, which meant I could fill a prescription for the inhaler I'd needed since childhood, but Gerald never consistently filled because he considered asthma a mindset problem. I got a job within the week. Cashier at a gas station convenience store on 3rd Street. Night shift, $9.50 an hour. I stood behind a bulletproof partition and scanned energy drinks and lottery tickets from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. and walked back to the shelter in the gray pre-dawn light. I kept Patricia's envelope in the inside pocket of my jacket at all times. Not for the money. That was mostly spent. For the proof that she'd tried. That she'd loved me in the only way Gerald's house allowed. The first thing I bought with my own paycheck was a pair of sneakers from the clearance rack at Walmart. $12, white with a blue stripe. I laced them up in the parking lot and stood on the asphalt and felt, for the first time in months, like I was standing on ground that was actually mine. Have you ever had a moment like that, where something small, something cheap, made you feel like you were finally allowed to exist? I used to lie on that bunk at the shelter and wonder, why did wanting an education count as disobedience? Why was ambition betrayal? If you grew up in a house where your dreams were treated as disrespect, you know exactly what I mean. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. I passed my GED 4 months later, scored in the 92nd percentile in math. My grandmother would have been proud. At 18, I enrolled at Sinclair Community College, the same school I'd been secretly applying to when Gerald found me out. The irony sat in my chest like a stone. Financial aid covered most of the tuition. My convenience store wages covered the rest. Barely. I moved out of the shelter and into a shared apartment with 2 other students. A 1-bedroom that we split 3 ways, sleeping in shifts because one of us always had a night class. Business administration. I chose it because my grandmother told me I was sharp with numbers, and because I understood, in a way I couldn't yet articulate, that money was the architecture underneath everything Gerald had built and everything he'd used against me. If I was going to stop being controlled, I needed to understand the machinery of control. 300 miles of interstate and a different area code separated me from Ridgewood Drive, but Dayton has a way of pulling you back through rumor. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in 2 years sent me a Facebook message. Your dad took out a loan on the house. Something about Garrett's shop. I looked it up. Public records. Montgomery County Recorder's Office. Gerald had taken out a home equity line of credit, $85,000, secured against 4892 Ridgewood Drive. The funds were dispersed the same month a new business entity registered with the state. Thornton and Son Auto Repair, LLC, and Son. Not and daughter. Not and family. One afternoon, my bus route to campus passed through the commercial strip on Linden Avenue, and there it was. A freshly painted sign with blue background and yellow block letters. Thornton and Son Auto, mounted on a building Gerald had leased, with money borrowed against the only thing of value he owned. $85,000 on his son's dream. $340 is what my mother could scrape together for mine. The year I turned 20, I almost quit. I was working 2 jobs, the convenience store and a weekend housekeeping shift at a Comfort Inn off of Pine 75, while carrying 15 credit hours at Sinclair. My alarm went off at 5:30 every morning, and some nights I didn't get to sleep until 1. I ate ramen and peanut butter sandwiches and free continental breakfast leftovers that the hotel let staff take home in styrofoam containers. I nearly failed accounting 201. Not because I didn't understand debits and credits, but because I fell asleep during the midterm. Actually fell asleep, pen in hand, face on the desk, and woke up with 20 minutes left and a test half blank. And then came the message from a cousin, a screenshot of something Gerald had posted on Facebook. I didn't have him as a friend, but the family network is porous in small-town Ohio. Gerald's post read, "Sad to say my daughter chose the streets over family. I tried my best. Some people don't want to be helped. Pray for her." Below it, 11 comments. Relatives expressing sympathy for Gerald. One aunt wrote, "You did everything you could, Ger. She'll learn the hard way. Nobody asked me. Nobody checked." That night, after my housekeeping shift, I sat on the bus at 11 p.m., forehead against the cold window, and I cried for the first time since the fire. Not loud, not dramatic, just tears running into the collar of a uniform polo that smelled like bleach and someone else's hotel room. For about 10 minutes, I wondered whether Gerald was right, whether I was wasting my time, whether the world was just a series of rooms controlled by men like him and I'd never find one that was mine. Then I remembered my grandmother's hands, the quilt, the stitching. 3 winters of patience. "You're sharp with numbers, Bethany. You have to go to school." I wiped my face with my sleeve. I got off at my stop. I walked home. And the next morning, I retook the exam and passed. I finished my associate's degree the semester I turned 21. Not with honors, not with fanfare, just a diploma in a cardboard folder and the quiet knowledge that nobody had handed me a single credit. The degree led to a job at a title company called Howell and Dean on East 5th Street. Entry level. $15 an hour. My job was to organize closing documents, verify property records, and process title searches. The unglamorous paperwork behind every real estate transaction in the greater Dayton area. Stacks of deeds, lien releases, mortgage assignments, and foreclosure filings passed through my hands every day. I learned to read them the way a mechanic reads engine codes, quickly, precisely, looking for the thing that didn't belong. The office was small. 4 desks, a copier that jammed twice a week, fluorescent lights that buzzed at a frequency only I seemed to hear. But it was mine. My desk. My name on the mailbox. My paychecks deposited into an account no one else could touch. Linda Marsh was a broker who worked out of the suite next door. She was 45, silver-streaked hair pinned in a low twist, and she wore reading glasses on a chain that she swung like a lasso when she was thinking. She started noticing me because I was always the last one in the building. One evening she leaned through the doorway and said, "You're still here." "I like reading the filings," I said, which was true. She looked at me over her glasses. "You're smarter than half the agents I've hired. Why aren't you licensed?" "Working on it," I said, which wasn't true yet, but became true the moment she said it. Linda began mentoring me. Over coffee, over lunch, over stacks of comp analyses. She taught me how to read a neighborhood, how to calculate equity, how to spot a distressed property before it hit the courthouse steps. "In real estate," she told me once, "paper is power. Whoever holds the deed holds the truth." I wrote that on a sticky note and put it on my desk. It stayed there for 2 years. I passed the Ohio real estate licensing exam on my first attempt, 3 weeks after my 22nd birthday. Linda hired me as a junior agent at her brokerage the same afternoon. I was making commission now. Not much at first, but enough that I moved into a studio apartment where I didn't have to sleep in shifts, and enough that I started putting money into a savings account I checked every Sunday morning with something close to disbelief. Meanwhile, 600 miles of hard work separated me from 4,892 Ridgewood Drive. But public records don't care about distance. Through my title company contacts, I had access to the same county databases I'd used every day at Howell and Dean. I wasn't searching for Gerald. I didn't need to. When you work in real estate in Montgomery County, information about every property, every lien, every default, every transfer flows across your desk like water. You don't have to go looking. It finds you. And what it told me was this. Thornton and Son Auto was bleeding money. Garrett had hired too many people, spent too much on a renovation nobody asked for, and was pulling from the business account for personal expenses. A lease on a Dodge Charger, weekend trips to Put in Bay with his girlfriend. The shop had been open less than 2 years and was already operating at a loss. Gerald, rather than confronting his golden child, doubled down. He took out a cash-out refinance on the house, rolling the original mortgage and the HELOC into a single new loan that pushed his total debt on 4892 Ridgewood past what the house was worth. On paper, he was underwater. In his mind, he was saving the family legacy. One evening, driving home from a showing, I passed the Linden Avenue commercial strip. The Thornton and Son Auto sign still glowed, but 2 of its LED bulbs had burned out. The T and the O were dark. The sign now read, HRN on and Son AUO. It was the kind of detail a novelist would invent. But it was real, and I saw it, and I kept driving. The phone call came on a Sunday morning, 6 months before everything changed. I didn't recognize the number. I almost didn't answer. I was reviewing comps for a listing appointment, but something made me swipe. Beth? I hadn't heard my mother's voice in 4 years. It was thinner than I remembered, stretched tight like a wire carrying too much current. Mom. I'm calling from Ruth's phone. Mrs. Delano. Of course. Patricia didn't have a phone Gerald couldn't check. Ruth gave me your number a long time ago. I didn't know if you'd pick up. I picked up. Silence. Then. Your father is under a lot of stress, Beth. The shop isn't doing well. He's drinking more. Garrett doesn't come around much anymore. She wasn't asking me for money. She wasn't asking me to come back. She was just talking. The way a person talks when they've been holding their breath inside a sealed room and someone finally cracks a window. Are you okay, Mom? A pause. I'm the same. Which meant, no. Mom. You can leave, you know. There are resources. I can help you find. I'm fine, Beth. I just wanted to hear your voice. We talked for 8 more minutes. She asked what I was doing. I told her I worked in real estate. She said, Your grandmother would be so proud. And her voice broke, and she recovered. And we both pretended it hadn't happened. After I hung up, I sat on my apartment floor for 10 minutes, staring at the wall. I thought about calling Gerald. I didn't. I thought about calling Garrett. I didn't. I thought about driving to Dayton and knocking on the front door of 4892 Ridgewood and saying, What? What would I say to a man who burned my things and slept fine that night? Nothing. There was nothing to say. 3 months later, I was sitting at my desk scrolling through the weekly foreclosure list published by the Montgomery County Recorder's Office, a task I did routinely as part of my work, looking for investment opportunities for Linda's clients. And a familiar address stopped my hand on the mouse. 4892 Ridgewood Drive. Notice of default. Bank of Dayton, N.A. Scheduled auction date, 60 days. I read the address 3 times, then a 4th. Then I pushed back from my desk and stared at the ceiling for a full minute, breathing through my mouth like a swimmer surfacing after too long underwater. 4892 Ridgewood Drive. 3-bedroom ranch, brass house numbers, lazy boy in the living room, burn barrel in the backyard. The notice of default meant Gerald had missed payments for at least 90 consecutive days. The bank had filed with the county. A notice of sale would follow, and then the house would go to auction on the courthouse steps, open to any bidder with a cashier's check and a pulse. Gerald Thornton, the man who had built his entire identity around that house, who had polished the brass numbers every spring, who had re-shingled the roof with his own hands, who had told me at least 100 times that his house meant his rules, had borrowed against it until the bank decided it wasn't his anymore. I pulled the full record. The HELOC from 3 years ago, $85,000. The cash-out refinance from 2 years ago, another 60 on top. Total debt secured against a house worth maybe $185,000 on a good day. Gerald hadn't made a mortgage payment in 6 months. The bank had followed every required step. Notice of default, right to cure, notice of sale. And Gerald had done nothing. No payment, no negotiation, no short sale. Either he didn't understand the paperwork, or he was too proud to ask for help, or both. I closed the browser tab. I opened it again. I closed it. I went to the break room and poured a cup of coffee and stood by the window. I remembered the fire, the quilt, the lighter fluid, the garden hose he held to protect his lawn. My house. My rules. Not anymore, I said out loud, to no one. Then I went back to my desk and pulled up the auction calendar. I told Linda before I told anyone else. We were sitting in her office, a corner room with a window overlooking a strip mall parking lot, which sounds depressing, but Linda had filled with potted ferns and framed photos of her closings, and it felt more like a greenhouse than a workplace. I need your advice, I said, not as my broker, as someone I trust. She set down her reading glasses. Go. There's a property going to auction in Montgomery County. 3-bed ranch, 1/4 acre. Needs a new roof and some plumbing work, but the structure's solid. Market comp in that neighborhood is about $185. Auction estimate is probably $120 to $140. Linda tilted her head. That's a decent margin. What's the catch? It's my father's house. She looked at me for a long time. The ferns swayed in the air from the vent above us. Then she asked the question I needed her to ask. Is this a business decision or a personal one? Both, I said. Then let me ask you this. If this were any house, owned by any stranger, at that price point, in that zip code, would you buy it? I'd already run the numbers. Purchase at auction, roughly $130. Closing costs and title fees, maybe $4,000. Estimated repairs. Roof, water heater, some updated plumbing, $15,000 to $20,000. All-in cost, around $155. Market value after repairs, $185 to $190. 30+ thousand in built equity from day one. Yes, I said. I'd buy it. Then you already have your answer. She paused. But Bethany, make sure you're buying a house, not buying a fight. I'm buying a house, I said. If it also happens to be the house where my father burned everything I owned, that's his problem, not mine. Linda looked at me over her glasses. Then she nodded once, slowly, the way she did when a deal made sense to her. I'll help you with the pre-approval, she said. I didn't go looking for this, but I wasn't going to look away either. I spent the next 3 weeks preparing the way Linda had taught me, the same way I'd prepare for any investment property, with the same spreadsheets and the same due diligence, because if this was going to work, it had to be clean. I ran the title search myself. The deed was in Gerald's name alone. Patricia was not on the title. A decision Gerald had made when they bought the house 24 years ago, claiming it simplified things. What it actually simplified was control. If the house was only in his name, Patricia had no say in what happened to it. She couldn't sell it, refinance it, or prevent him from borrowing against it. She was a guest in her own home and always had been. I verified the liens, the original mortgage, the HELOC, the cash-out refinance, all secured by the property, all in default. I confirmed the auction date, the location, Montgomery County Common Pleas Court, and the deposit requirement, a cashier's check for 10% of the opening bid, due at the time of sale. I got pre-approved for an investment property loan through a local credit union Linda had worked with for years. Combined with my savings, 4 years of commission checks, gas station shifts,
hotel housekeeping wages, every dollar I'd earned since the day I climbed out of that bedroom window. I had enough for the deposit, and then some. The night before the auction, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my apartment floor with a mug of tea, and the only photograph I still owned from my old life, a Polaroid of my grandmother holding me at age 5, taken at a church picnic. I was laughing. She was looking down at me like I was the only good thing in the frame. I tucked the photo back into my wallet and set my alarm for 6 a.m. Tomorrow, I would stand on the steps of the Montgomery County Courthouse and bid on the house where my father had told me I was nothing. The cashier's check in my bag was for $14,000, 10% of the opening bid. It represented 6 years of labor, 6 years of silence, and 6 years of becoming someone Gerald Thornton never imagined I could be. The Montgomery County Courthouse smelled like floor wax and old paper. The auction was held in a room on the second floor. Linoleum, folding chairs, a podium at the front, and about 20 people sat in clusters, most of them investors or attorneys. I was the only woman under 30. The auctioneer worked through properties in order: a duplex on Wayne Avenue, a vacant lot near Riverside, an apartment building on Salem with a tax lien dispute. Each one drawn out in legalese and then resolved in 60 seconds of raised paddles and monotone bids. Then, Lot 7, 4,892 Ridgewood Drive, single-family residential, 3-bedroom, 1.5 bath, quarter-acre lot, foreclosure sale, opening bid set by the line holder at $119,000. My chest tightened. I held my paddle flat against my thigh. 2 other bidders raised immediately. A man in a golf shirt who looked like he bought houses the way some people buy scratch-offs, and a woman with a clipboard who represented some regional investment group. 119, 122, 125. The golf shirt man dropped out at 128. The clipboard woman pushed to 130. I raised my paddle. 131. The clipboard woman looked at me, then at her spreadsheet, then shook her head. The auctioneer waited. Silence in the room like a held breath. Sold. $131,000. Bidder number 7. I walked to the clerk's table and signed. The pen was cheap. Blue ballpoint courthouse issue, the kind that costs 12 cents in bulk. But when I wrote Bethany Thornton on the purchase agreement, my hand was steady. The clerk glanced at the name, then at the name on the foreclosure filing. Thornton and Thornton. She looked up at me. I looked back. She stamped the document without comment. Gerald had let every opportunity to save the house pass. Every cure period, every negotiation window, every chance to sell before the bank took over. He was too proud to ask for help, too stubborn to admit the shop had failed, too convinced that 4,892 Ridgewood Drive would always be his because he'd decided it would always be his. But decisions don't override defaults, and defaults don't care about pride. The deed was recorded 17 days later at the Montgomery County Recorder's Office. I picked up the certified copy on a Tuesday afternoon, and I sat in my car in the courthouse parking lot and held it in both hands. Deed of conveyance. Grantee Bethany M. Thornton. My name. My house. The following Saturday, I drove to Ridgewood Drive. I hadn't been on that street in 6 years. The neighborhood looked the same. Mowed lawns, American flag mailboxes, pickup trucks in driveways, but smaller, somehow. The way places from childhood always shrink when you return as an adult carrying different measurements. I parked across the street from 4892. The brass house numbers were tarnished. Gerald hadn't polished them. The patio concrete he'd poured himself had a long crack running through it. The lawn was mowed, though. Of course it was. Gerald would let the roof rot before he'd let the grass grow past 2 inches. He was outside, in fact, pushing a mower in straight lines, wearing the same flannel shirt he'd worn the day he burned my things. He didn't see me. I got out of my car. I stood on the sidewalk in front of the house. His house. My house. And I asked a woman walking her dog to take my photograph. She smiled and obliged. In the photo, I'm standing in front of the brass numbers, 4892 visible over my left shoulder. My expression is calm. Not smiling. Not angry. just present. I printed the photo at a CVS. On the back, I wrote in neat block letters, "New owner, deed recorded date. Montgomery County Recorder's Office, B. Thornton." I slid it into a white envelope. No name on the outside, just like the one my mother had given me. I drove to Ridgewood Drive one more time, opened the mailbox at the curb, placed the envelope inside, raised the red flag, and drove away. I waited one day. I wanted him to find the envelope first, to hold the photograph, to read the back, to feel the floor shift, before he heard my voice. Sunday afternoon, 4:17 p.m. I was sitting in my apartment at the kitchen table, hands folded, phone in front of me. I picked it up and dialed the number I'd never deleted. It rang once. One ring. That's all it took. "Bethany?" His voice was different, older, rougher at the edges like sandpaper that's been used too many times, but there was something else in it, something I hadn't expected. He sounded like a man who had been waiting by the phone but would never admit it. A man who had kept his daughter's number saved for 6 years without calling because calling would mean the silence was his fault, and admitting fault was the one thing Gerald Thornton could not do. "Check your mailbox," I said. Then I hung up. I set the phone on the table and stared at it for a long time. My heart was pounding in a way that surprised me. Not from anger, not from triumph, but from the strange, vertiginous feeling of completing a circuit that had been open for 6 years. He'd picked up on the first ring. He could have let it go to voicemail. He could have waited 3 rings, 4, 5. Long enough to pretend he wasn't eager. Long enough to reassemble the Gerald who didn't need anyone. But he hadn't. He'd picked up the phone like a man reaching for something he was afraid would disappear. I didn't know what he'd do next. I didn't know if he'd rage or cry, or drive to my office, or sit on the porch in silence. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. For the first time in his life, Gerald Thornton was going to open a piece of mail and discover that his daughter owned the roof over his head. I wasn't there when he opened it. What I know, I learned later. From Mrs. Delano, who was sitting on her porch with a glass of iced tea and a direct sightline to Gerald's mailbox, because Ruth Delano was 74 years old and had earned the right to observe her neighborhood without apology. She told me Gerald walked to the curb about 20 minutes after my call. He was still holding his flip phone. He opened the mailbox, pulled out the white envelope, and turned it over in his hands. No name, no return address. He tore it open standing in the driveway. He looked at the photograph. Ruth said he went very still, the kind of still that only happens when the body is processing something the mind hasn't caught up with yet. He stared at the front, then he flipped it over and read the back. Ruth said his hand dropped to his side. The envelope fluttered to the pavement. He sat down on the front porch steps, the same porch where he used to sit with a Budweiser and survey his domain. And he did not move for 40 minutes. He didn't call Patricia. He didn't shout. He didn't go inside. He just sat there holding the photograph in one hand and his phone in the other, staring at the lawn he'd mowed that morning, the lawn that now belonged to his 23-year-old daughter. Ruth told me he called me back. 3 times. I didn't answer. He sat there like a man who'd just been told his own house didn't know his name anymore. Ruth said to me later over the phone, in her quiet, steady voice. I said nothing. "You okay, sweetheart?" she asked. I thought about it. Actually thought about it. "Yeah," I said. "I think I am." For 6 years, Gerald had controlled who got to speak and who had to stay silent. Now the silence was his, and I was the one who'd chosen not to fill it. 2 days later, Gerald walked into the offices of Marsh & Associates Realty at 10:15 on a Tuesday morning. I was at my desk, second cup of coffee, reviewing a listing agreement for a property on Huffman Avenue. Linda was in her office with the door open. 2 other agents, Mark and Denise, were at their desks. A client couple sat in the waiting area flipping through a home search binder. The door opened and Gerald stepped in like he was entering a courtroom. Flannel shirt, work jeans with a grease stain on the left knee, ball cap that read Thornton and Son Auto, the logo of a business that had closed 3 months ago. He looked older, thinner in the face, heavier under the eyes. But his posture was the same. Rigid, commanding. The posture of a man who expected rooms to rearrange themselves around him. He scanned the office and found me. Bethany. I looked up from my desk. My nameplate was facing him. Bethany Thornton, licensed agent. Gerald, I said. Not Dad. Not anymore. He crossed the room in 4 strides. You think this is funny? You think you can take my house? I set down my pen. It stopped being your house when you stopped paying the mortgage 6 months ago. The bank filed for foreclosure. The auction was public. Anyone with financing could bid. I had financing. I bid. I won. It's all recorded at the county recorder's office. That is my house. His voice cracked upward. Mark and Denise stopped typing. The client couple in the waiting area looked up. I built that patio. I reshingled that roof. And then you borrowed against it until there was nothing left, I said. I kept my voice level. You took out an $85,000 HELOC for Garrett's shop. Then a cash-out refinance for $60,000 more. The shop failed. The payments stopped. The bank followed procedure. This isn't something I did to you, Gerald. This is something that happened because of choices you made. He stood there, breathing hard, fists at his sides. The room was silent in the way rooms go silent when everyone is pretending not to watch. Linda stepped out of her office. She was calm the way a woman who has brokered 1,200 transactions is calm, unshakable, measured, with the kind of authority that doesn't need volume. Sir, I'm going to need you to lower your voice. This is a place of business. Gerald swung toward her. You don't know this girl. She called CPS on her own father when she was 14 years old. That's who you hired. Linda didn't blink. She looked at me. I looked back. I reported my school counselor, I said, because you screamed in my face at the dinner table. CPS came because they were supposed to come. You weren't charged with anything. But you made sure every relative I had knew about it, and you used it to isolate me for 3 years. So let's be accurate about what happened, Gerald. The client couple was staring openly now. Denise had her hand frozen over her keyboard. Mark had quietly pulled out his phone, not recording, just holding it, like a reflex. Gerald's face reddened. He opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. I raised you, he said. His voice was quieter now, but the edge was still there. I fed you. I gave you a roof. And this is what I get? You burned everything I owned in the backyard, I said. My clothes, my books, my grandmother's quilt. You stood there with a garden hose to protect your lawn and let 6 years of my life turn to ash. And then you told the whole family I was ungrateful. I paused. Every person in that office was listening. You don't get to destroy someone's belongings and then complain when you lose yours, through your own choices. Gerald stared at me. I could see the machinery behind his eyes grinding, trying to find the angle, the leverage, the word that would flip this back to a reality he controlled. But there was no angle. There was no leverage. The deed was recorded. The auction was legal. The numbers were public. You have 30 days, I said. Standard eviction timeline under Ohio law. I won't shorten it. I won't extend it. 30 days. He stood in the middle of the office surrounded by people who now knew exactly who he was, and for the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. He walked out without closing the door. You know, standing there in that office, watching him leave, I realized something I hadn't expected. He still didn't understand. He still thought the house was about power. His power. He never considered that I didn't buy it to take something from him. I bought it because I could. Because 6 years ago, I couldn't buy a bus ticket. And now I could buy a house. The house just happened to be his. But here's what I keep turning over in my mind. Is there a difference between justice and revenge when the person never sees the line? What do you think? Does it matter what you call it? Or does it only matter what it costs you? Tell me in the comments. I really want to know. Garrett called me 4 days later. It was the first time I'd heard his voice since I was 17. Beth? He sounded like a man standing in a room where everything was on fire and he'd just realized the exit was locked. I know we haven't. It's been. Look, Dad needs somewhere to go. He's got 30 days, right? He told me. He does. Okay. So, here's the thing. A pause so long I could hear him swallow. I don't really have room. Kelly and I are in a one-bedroom in Columbus. It's tight. I can't take him. Garrett, I said. He mortgaged the house for your shop? $85,000? He refinanced for another $60,000 to keep it afloat when it started failing. You know that, right? Silence. He bet everything on you, I said. Everything. The house. His credit. His retirement. He put it all into Thornton and Son Auto. And when the shop went under, you moved to Columbus. I didn't ask him to. Did you pay him back? More silence. The answer was in the silence. Beth, I'm not the bad guy here. I didn't say you were, but I'm not the solution either. You had 22 years of his support. I had 17 years of his control. He gave you a business. He gave me a burn barrel. And now you're calling me, the one he threw out, to fix what the one he chose couldn't hold together. His breathing was ragged. I'm not selling the house, I said. And I'm not letting him live there rent-free. That's not my responsibility. If you want to help your father, help him. But you don't get to hand that job to me. I hung up, and I sat there thinking about the sign, Thornton and Son Auto, and how the whole family's money and faith had gone into 2 words on a marquee. And when the marquee went dark, the son kept driving. He bet everything on his son. His son left him on red. Gerald moved out on day 27. No phone call. No forwarding address. Mrs. Delano told me she saw him loading a pickup truck. A borrowed one, not Garrett's. With boxes, a duffel bag, and the lazy boy recliner. He drove to a cousin's house on the other side of Dayton. The throne came with him. The kingdom didn't. I waited a week. Then I drove to 4892 Ridgewood with a locksmith, a contractor, and a chest full of feelings I hadn't sorted yet. The house was dimmer than I remembered. Gerald had left it in rough shape. Stained carpet, a dripping kitchen faucet, a living room that smelled like Budweiser and old newspaper. But the bones were solid. The walls were straight. The foundation hadn't cracked, even if the man living on top of it had. I walked through every room, making notes for the contractor. New roof, water heater, update the plumbing in the hall bath, repaint. It was a project, not a miracle. The kind of house I'd learned to see potential in because Linda taught me to look past the surface. Then I reached the back bedroom. My old room, the one Gerald had turned into Garrett's gym. The weight bench was gone. The mirror was gone. But in the corner, behind a sliding closet door, there was a shelf Gerald apparently hadn't bothered clearing because he assumed it was empty. It wasn't. I found a Nike shoebox, crushed and dusty. I pulled off the lid. Inside, 3 pages torn from a sketchbook, edges blackened and curled. A charcoal drawing of a woman's hands, my grandmother's hands, drawn from memory when I was 16. 2 more sketches beneath it, half destroyed. And at the bottom, folded into a small square, a piece of fabric, patchwork cotton, singed at the edges, faded lavender scent, barely there, a single square from the quilt. Gerald had gone into the ashes. After the fire had died and I'd gone to my room and the neighborhood had turned out its lights, he had reached into that burn barrel and pulled these things out. He'd kept them in a shoebox on a shelf in a closet for 6 years. He never told me. He never used them to apologize. He just kept them. The way he kept my phone number. Silently, privately, uselessly. I held the square of fabric and sat on the bare floor of my old bedroom and felt something I couldn't name. Not forgiveness, not anger. Something in between. Like finding a handprint in cement from someone who broke your window. It didn't change what he did. But it changed the shape of what I remembered. From a man who only knew how to destroy, to a man who also knew how to regret, but chose the wrong way to carry it. Every single time. Patricia called me 3 days after I changed the locks. Her voice was different. I noticed it immediately. Not the thin wire tension I'd heard 6 months ago, but something closer to clear water. Still cautious, still quiet, but present in a way she hadn't been in years. "He's staying at Dale's," she said. Dale was Gerald's cousin, a house on the west side with a pull-out couch and no questions. "He took the recliner and 3 boxes, that's all." "And you?" I asked. "I'm still at the house." A pause. "Your house." Neither of us said anything for a few seconds. "Beth, do you want me to leave?" I leaned against my kitchen counter and closed my eyes. I saw her in the dark 6 years ago, sliding an envelope into my hand. $340, a birth certificate, a social security card. The entire fortune of a woman who had spent 24 years under a roof she didn't own, married to a man who treated silence as consent and obedience as love. "Do you want to stay?" I asked. She started to cry. Not the stifled, one hand over the mouth crying she'd learned in Gerald's house. Real crying, the kind that takes up space, the kind a person makes when they realize they've been given a door. "Yes," she said. "Please." "Then stay. $200 a month. Enough to cover utilities and give you dignity. I'm not giving you charity, Mom. I'm giving you a lease." "$200, she repeated. "I'm fixing the roof next month. The plumber comes Thursday. And Mom..." I paused. "His name's not on anything anymore. Not the deed, not the mailbox, not the rules." She cried again. But this time it was the kind of crying you do when a weight lifts and your body doesn't know how to be that light yet. "I should have done more, Beth. I know that." "You gave me the envelope, Mom. That was enough to start." That night, for the first time in 24 years, Patricia Thornton slept in a house where the front door was unlocked because the person who owned the deadbolt was her daughter, and her daughter believed in doors that open from the inside. I spent the next 4 weekends at 4892 Ridgewood with a toolbox, a contractor named Eddie who owed Linda a favor, and a stubbornness I apparently inherited from the one person I least wanted to resemble. We tore off the old shingles and laid new ones, charcoal gray instead of Gerald's faded brown. I chose the color myself, standing in the Lowe's paint aisle for 20 minutes, running my fingers over sample cards. I repainted the exterior, soft white with slate blue trim, a palette so different from Gerald's beige and brown that the house looked like a completely different structure from the street. Which was the point. The brass house numbers stayed. I cleaned them, though. They deserved better than neglect. Inside, Patricia and I pulled up the stained carpet together and discovered hardwood floors underneath that Gerald had covered when they moved in because he didn't like the sound of footsteps. We sanded them and sealed them, and the house filled with the smell of polyurethane and new beginnings, which are not the same scent but arrive in the same season. I converted the back bedroom, the gym, the closet, the room that had once been mine, back into a bedroom. New paint, new curtains. And on the wall, in a simple oak frame behind glass, I hung the square of quilt fabric I'd found in the shoebox, singed edges and faded lavender, preserved. Mrs. Delano came over one Sunday with a flat of marigolds and 2 bags of potting soil. We knelt in the backyard together, in the same spot where the burn barrel had stood, and we planted flowers, gold and orange, the kind that come back every year without being asked. "He burned things in this yard," I said. Ruth pressed soil around a seedling and smiled. "And you planted them." Gerald called in October, 5 months after the auction, 1 month after the marigolds bloomed. I was sitting on the front porch, my front porch, drinking coffee and watching the neighborhood settle into the kind of early evening stillness that makes Ohio suburbs feel like paintings. The trees on Ridgewood Drive were turning. Mrs. Delano waved from her yard. Patricia was inside, watching television. Whatever she wanted, as loud as she wanted. My phone buzzed. Gerald's number. I looked at it for 3 rings. Then I answered. "Bethany." His voice was gravel and distance. "Gerald." A pause so long I could hear a dog barking 2 streets over. "You were always stubborn," he said. "I was always determined," I said. You called it stubborn because it didn't serve you. Another pause. I could hear him breathing. The heavy, labored breath of a 56-year-old man whose pride had cost him everything and whose lungs weren't what they used to be. How's your mother? He asked. It was the first time he'd asked about Patricia in a conversation with me. Not my wife. Not her. Your mother. She's good, I said. She's at Ridgewood. She's safe. He didn't respond to that. I don't know if he could. Gerald, I said. I'm not going to pretend that what you did was okay. The fire, the isolation, the way you erased me from the family. I'm not going to pretend any of that didn't happen. I paused. But I'm not going to punish you forever either. I won't make it easy. But I won't seal the door. So what is this? He asked. This is a conversation, I said. That's all it is right now. He was quiet for a long time. Okay, he said, and hung up. I set the phone down on the porch railing and picked up my coffee. The sky was amber and darkening. Somewhere inside, Patricia laughed at something on the television, a sound I hadn't heard from her in years, maybe ever, and the windows glowed with a warmth that had nothing to do with the thermostat. He lost this house the same way he lost me, by refusing to believe we could leave. I'm sitting on the porch again as I tell you this. Morning this time. Early, before the neighborhood wakes up. Coffee in a mug I bought at a thrift store, the kind with a chipped handle and a faded floral print that reminds me of fabric in a quilt. The lawn is mine. The roof is mine. The brass numbers that read 4892 catch the sunrise. And they're polished now, because some things deserve care even when the person who installed them didn't know how to give it. I didn't buy this house to get revenge. I bought it because it was a sound investment, because I had the knowledge and the capital and the license to make the decision, and because 6 years ago I was a 17-year-old girl standing in this yard with nothing, watching everything I'd owned turn to smoke, and I'd promised myself, silently, without witnesses, that I would build something from the ashes. I just didn't know the something would be this literal. If there's a lesson, it's not the one you'd expect. It's not, work hard and you'll show them. It's not, the best revenge is success. It's simpler and harder than that. My grandmother stitched that quilt over 3 winters. She cut fabric, chose patterns, threaded needles, and sat in a recliner night after night, making something that held warmth, because she wanted me to be warm. It took patience. It took hands. It took time she didn't know she was running out of. I lost everything and built it back in 6 years. Both were made by hand. If you're in your first year, the year where everything is ash and you're standing in a yard with nothing, I want you to know that is not the end. But nobody is going to carry you out. You have to climb through the window yourself. The envelope helps, but the walking is yours. That's my story. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know. If someone in your life needs to hear this, send them this video. And if you want more stories about people who rebuilt from nothing, there's a link in the description. Subscribe if you haven't. I'll see you in the next one.